Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are calling in from. Welcome to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy webinar, Solidarity in Times of Crisis, Funding Mutual Aid. My name is Taylor Dudley, and I'm the Director of Coalition Building at the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, where I lead strategic coalition initiatives that elevate philanthropy's role in equitable disaster recovery. My cross-sector experience spans grant making, disaster recovery, climate action, and social impact. Before recently moving into this coalition role, I was working on CDP's international grant making for the past 3 years. This photo on the slide was recently taken at the annual Clinton Global Initiative and really highlights the power of coalitions and also mutual aid. In this photo, Haneen is representing the emergency response rooms in Sudan, highlighting the needs in Sudan and calling on philanthropy to join the coalition to explore ways they can successfully channel funds to local organizations and mutual aid groups in Sudan. More on this work in a bit. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. First of all, live captioning is available now via Zoom. You can click on closed caption live transcript to access it, and these are available in multiple languages. We are recording this webinar, and it may be available on our website and YouTube channel later. When you leave the webinar, we have a brand new and very short survey. Very short is underlined in what I was given. So for you to complete after the webinar. This helps us improve our education work at CDP, and we'd appreciate your help in completing it. You can also submit questions at any time during the webinar using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer them at the end of the panel presentation. And next, a thank you to our promoters. So this webinar has been promoted by Alliance Magazine, Appalachia Funders Network, Giving Compass, Peak Grant Making, Philanthropy New York, the Funders Network, and United Philanthropy Forum. Thank you to all of you for helping us to reach a broader audience of funders. As we begin the webinar, CDP acknowledges it works on the stolen lands of the many original peoples. We recognize that Indigenous peoples have been displaced and disenfranchised from their land by the socioeconomic and cultural impacts of colonialism and disasters. The erasure of Indigenous knowledge about how to care for these lands has caused environmental destruction and degradation. CDP is committed to dismantling the ongoing legacies, systems, and structures of settler colonialism and white supremacy and their connections to philanthropy today and in the future. Despite centuries of theft, violence, and murder, this is still and always will be Indigenous land. Please join us in acknowledging the original peoples and their elders and past, present, and future generations. At the end of the webinar, we hope that you will understand the principles and practices of mutual aid in disaster contexts, including how it differs from charity. Learn why supporting mutual aid is a high-impact approach to disaster giving, and explore funding strategies that support community-led recovery and long-term resilience. Let's take a look at the results from our survey. It looks like some of you do understand what mutual aid is. Great, thanks for joining us today. Most of you still have some questions. That's fantastic, you're in the right place. And some of you don't really know about mutual aid or responded neutral. Thanks for joining us. Hope you are able to gain a lot from our webinar today. And then the second question here, it looks like almost half of you have funded, engaged in, received support from, or otherwise participated in mutual aid project activities. That's fantastic. Hopefully, if we were to have this webinar in the future, that number would be higher if we were to gather again a year from now. Thank you all for participating in that poll. Okay, now I'm going to introduce our speakers. It's my honor to introduce our special guests. As sad as recent events have been, I'm excited to learn how funders can help make a difference. A sixth-generation Eastern Kentuckian with a love for all things Appalachian and advocacy, Stacy Fugit is the executive director of Appalachians for Appalachia. She has been involved in mutual aid work for many years, and one of her biggest projects has been within the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky during flood relief efforts. While we don't usually share educational information since we value lived experience so highly, I wanted to note that her degree included a focus on the rare field of Appalachian studies. Chenier Kliebert is the founding executive director of Imagine Waterworks, an organization that reimagines the future through art, science, and connection. As a Creole Indigenous Louisianan, Klee stewards the Imagination Farm in New Orleans and has led most of Imagine Waterworks programs from their inception to today, focusing on climate, land stewardship, and disaster readiness and response. Imagine Waterworks is a former CDP grantee partner, having received grants from the Atlantic Hurricane Fund and the COVID-19 Response Fund. And lastly, Hajuj Kuka is a member of the Emergency Response Rooms, ERRs, in Sudan, alongside thousands of other Sudanese. Together, they provide dignified, decolonized humanitarian aid through the principles of mutual aid and decentralized good governance. Hajuj is a filmmaker with multiple films to his name, including Akasha in 2018 and Beats of the Antonov in 2014. Due to his work in Sudan, Hajuj was named one of the leading global thinkers by the Foreign Policy magazine. He trains and works with conflict-affected communities on community-based visual arts projects. CDP has funded the emergency response rooms through different organizations, as I mentioned during my introduction. Welcome to each of you, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. Before we move to our discussion, I want to share a short video from Right Livelihood featuring Hajuj. This video will help us visualize the work that is being done by the emergency response rooms, or ERRs. In January, the ERRs received one of the 2025 Right Livelihood Laureates Award, which honors courageous changemakers.
The emergency response rooms are like water. We're not an NGO that they can go to the headquarters and find the head of the NGO and shut it down. You can't touch us. We're so many. We're the community.
احنا عادة في أوقات الحروب عارفين دائما إنه الدولة بتتخلى عن مسؤوليتها، وعارفين إنه طرفين الحرب الاثنين ما بيلتزموا بالقوانين الدولية في الحرب. اللي حصل إنه المجتمع نفسه قرر إنه هو ينظم نفسه من اليوم الأول الحرب.
The situation in Sudan is the world's worst humanitarian crisis. It affects over half the population of Sudan. The amount of aid that's needed is beyond the capacity of any one institution. Because of the war that's raging, access is impossible for traditional humanitarian aid organizations in the traditional method. But the second week of the war, the emergency response were able to provide aid using mutual aid, which is the people themselves who need aid, they provide the aid for themselves.
طوارئ برضو من نقاط قوتها إنها قائمة على الشفافية والمحاسبية والعدالة في توزيع الطعام، توزيع الدواء، توفير الموية النظيفة، توفير المساحات الآمنة للنساء والأطفال.
Communities design, communities implement. A dollar donated is a dollar spent. So eliminating expenses, eliminating stipends and salaries and cars and rent. The humanitarian aid at the beginning, it was there. But now it come into it being an industry that is actually taking more than it's giving. In the emergency response rooms, we believe in the opposite. We believe in giving more than taking.
The activities they do depends on who's in the neighborhood. If you have a doctor in the neighborhood who can run the local clinic, then he's going to do that. If you have teachers who can teach, they'll teach. The most amazing part is one community teaches the other community. And mutual aid is like water. It's gifts everywhere and it spreads and you can't fight it.
Great. Hajooj, that's a very powerful video and really highlights the work you all are doing. In the video, you said mutual aid is the people themselves who need aid. They provide the aid for themselves. Can you tell us more about the emergency response rooms and what mutual aid means in that context?
Okay, hi everybody. So mutual aid is just one of the most amazing things. Like when the war started in Sudan, a lot of us were trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? And we ran to the international NGOs, the local NGOs, the UN, and all those bodies, and they were being super heroic, trying to get out of the country and getting their members out of the country and their workers and whatnot. And we were faced with what do we do? And in the beginning, it was just like me and I think almost 99% of the ERs, we had no clue what to do, and we never dealt with humanitarian aid. So we started figuring out, okay, what do we need to do? And it started very simple. We live in a city. When the war started, the hospitals, of course, were the first thing that were hit. There was a lot of people, and they needed help, logistics and whatnot. So some people were helping the hospitals. And some of us were like, yeah, we're not doctors. We're just going to try to do anti-war messages. So we did that for 2 weeks. And then what happened was cooking gas was the first thing. Living in a city, you try to cook, and then cooking gas starts cutting. So what do we do? So we started like, we need to get together. Let's go to the local school and try to cook together. So that's how mutual aid started. People started getting their things together, going to the local school, and cooking together. And from that, the situation kept getting worse. Sudan so the war started in Khartoum, and basically it got to the point of we even had pockets of famine in some places. Gender-based violence became just the norm. It's just like things I don't like, maybe we'll talk about later, but it was just really dire. Situation kept getting worse and worse and worse. People needed to evacuate. The bus ticket to get out went from about $40 to $700 per person. So it only meant the middle class and the rich people could get out, but not everybody else. So it just slowly got to the point where we just really needed to help each other. So mutual aid is the idea of we help each other. So people within the community who need to eat in a kitchen, who need to go to a clinic, who need to do this, they're the ones who are doing the activity. But for it to work, we need the solidarity. Really, like the war has been going on. I've been a volunteer for over 900 days. So as time goes on, resources start depleting. You start like, we need help. And at that point, we needed solidarity. So we needed help. The help started with people in the diaspora. But after a while, the middle class in the diaspora had to actually care about their own people, their own families, and they started taking over, sending them to some countries next doors, and they became refugees, and they had to spend on them. And then we started needing foundations in the beginning came in, people donated, we started getting money from different places, and the AR started becoming a name. We started knowing what we're doing. We started having a system. We started organizing, and we started saying like, because the UN at the time was saying there's no aid can go into Sudan, and we were providing aid. From 2 weeks in, we were like producing aid and stuff. So we started having partnerships. We have all these volunteers. We have all these systems in places. So we're able to volunteer and work with different people. So the bottom line is mutual aid is the idea that the first responders are the people who are in it. So how do you stand in solidarity with the people who are in it, and how do you allow them to become the first responders and realize that they know best? I'm just going to give one last example. When fashion is one of the hardest hit areas in Sudan now, with women and stuff, when it first has about 18 states exactly. And then we got together, and in a meeting, we decided we're going to send, we're all going to put our money together and send it to them. So we sent them $10,000. It's not a lot, but it got sent immediately. All the other NGOs, all the other UN systems, whatever, needs a long time to do evaluation and assessments and whatnot, and figure things out. So we send them $10,000, not asking them what to do. We're just being like, we know the situation is really hard, and we're just going to support you. So do your thing. And that was sent right away. And that $10,000, which is not a lot for a place that has millions of people, saved more lives than anything. And it also allowed them to figure out what can be done because at that moment, you're not sure what can be done. But they managed to come together, have the money with the resources, and then they were able to put together a plan and figure out what they need and start fundraising and doing whatnot. So bottom line, mutual aid, the people who know best are the people in it, and you have to just stand in solidarity with them, and you just don't ask them. You just stand in immediate solidarity. So that's what mutual aid is.
Thanks, Hajuj. I really appreciate those very concrete examples that you provided. Klee, I'm going to come to you now. There is a well-known expression in the US, as goes the South, so goes the nation. How has Southern mutual aid influenced how other communities utilize mutual aid, and why do you think that is?
Yeah, so we often see mutual aid as a response to oppression and divestment, to systemic failures. And we use this strategy in part to point out what we're seeing around us, and to move from there. And as we know, the South and the United States has a long history of divestment and extraction. But alongside that history has come a lot of movement in the mutual aid space. And so to put things sort of in like a historical context, we have an incredibly long history of practicing mutual aid here in New Orleans and surrounding areas that predates the United States. And that is mutual aid by that name. And so you can find mutual aid societies here in New Orleans in French, inspired by the French and Haitian revolutions and folks seeking refuge here and bringing values of care and reciprocity. We had what is currently known as the first Asian American Mutual Aid Society is also in the lower bayous below New Orleans. Those evolved into our Mardi Gras cruise. You can actually see the terms mutual aid on the buildings of the Mardi Gras crew societies, basically. They're clubhouses. So the language is already all around us, right? And that's true in New Orleans, just speaking from my experience here. And so with this current sort of uptick of using the actual language of the words mutual aid and folks being like, where did this come from? How are there suddenly hundreds and thousands of people practicing this by this language? I do have one theory that relates to as the South goes, so goes the nation. Our organization is part of the Southern Movement Assembly, which in 2016, we co-created this roadmap on how we would get through various systemic failures, and pointed out mutual aid as a strategy that we were going to use, and we were going to set up these mutual aid centers. In 2017 and 2018, we did a lot of preparation. That means when 2019 hit and COVID came to the US, folks were already prepared, hundreds of organizations across every state across the South with this mutual aid model in place and started actively utilizing it. At that point, it started permeating social media, and it actually having an international reach. And so my theory is that may have something to do with it.
Thanks, Klee. Appreciate that little history lesson there. Stacey, I'm going to come to you next. Appalachia is very special, but often ignored and overlooked community, and as such has a long history of supporting each other. You said on the planning call that mutual aid is reciprocity. What does mutual aid look like in Appalachia?
Yeah. So Clea, I'm really glad you mentioned the word reciprocity as well, because that's exactly what mutual aid is. It is the practice of exchanging things with others for mutual benefit. And so a lot of times when people think about mutual aid, they think about direct dollars. And while that is probably the most common form of mutual aid, we have this joke here in our East Kentucky mutual aid group, that we pass the same $50 around every 2 weeks, and it gets us all by at one point or another. But it doesn't have to always be money. And so sometimes it can be time. Sometimes it is just forming community and truly borrowing sugar or milk or something like that from your neighbor. But we're also seeing a lot of tool sheds. We're seeing a lot of community gardens. And so a lot of communal things that are popping up in Appalachia that lend to helping each other grow, helping each other get the things done in their daily lives that they need to get done, meet their basic needs. We also talked about yesterday on the planning call that, mutual aid is resistance. And I see mutual aid's role in resistance the same way that I see joy in resistance, is that it has to be a part of pushing back against systems that, at least here in Appalachia, I don't want to, speak for everyone, but here in Appalachia, we have been systemically impoverished, and that's an integral part of our history. And so mutual aid has been, yes, there's a textbook definition and there is a school of thought, but mutual aid has been something that we have been practicing for as long as we can remember, because we've known since the beginning that we're all we've got and we have to take care of each other.
Thanks, Stacy. It's great to hear the same message coming from so many different places in the world that use mutual aid as a model. I'm going to stay with you, Stacy. You had a very strong mutual aid response to the 2022 floods in Kentucky. Can you tell us more about your work after that disaster?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Appalachians for Appalachia is fiscally sponsored by the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky. And so, in the morning after the 2022 catastrophic flooding here in Eastern Kentucky, we got together and opened the Appalachian Crisis Aid Fund. And we were able to raise, I think the number is over $18 million at this point. I know 18 million is the number that we have put back into communities. And so, yeah, we got together. We had millions of dollars already coming into the door, from individual donors, from funders, from different organizations. And we wanted to figure out how we can get that money and, those dollars out the door as quickly as possible. So not in 3 weeks, not in 3 months, but in a week. And so we sat down and we came up with a very bare bones application. And it was truly just like name, contact info, and self-reporting damage. This was really a trust-based system. It was an honor system. We wanted to give people the agency to self-report their damage and not feel like they need to submit all kinds of evidence of that damage. And so we really wanted to trust people and we wanted to show up for our community in that way. So that was kind of the application, and we posted it on social media, and that's great, right? But a forethought that we really had was that, okay, yes, we can post this on Facebook and it can go viral, but we also need to think about how we reach the people who, number one, probably don't have internet because, their power poles are washed away, but also how do we reach Mama and Papa in the hills and hollers that probably don't have an email address to begin with. And so we deployed our volunteer platoon system, is what I call it, and we really met people where they are with paper applications. And it was chaotic, and we were as efficient as possible. But we ended up taking over 8,000 applications, just going to FEMA tents, going to clinics, places where we knew clusters of people would be, and having our volunteers sit down, fill out applications, and taking them back to our headquarters in Hazard, Kentucky, and having a bunch of young folks. So I was coaching an entire soccer team at that point, and having my soccer girls entering in these applications into a database. And our response, our data collection was actually so good of this self-reported data that the Kentucky Department of Emergency Management reached out to the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky to use our self-reported data, which I thought was really cool. And so we actually ended up opening a fund at the foundation for mutual aid to accept a grant on their behalf during the 2022 flood. So for the foundation, we were able to make grants to East Kentucky Mutual Aid, and we have, I can't speak directly to the expenditure policy that the foundation has, but I know that it's very in-depth and very robust. And so that has allowed them to have a very vibrant and productive relationship with EKY Mutual Aid through groups like Appalachians for Appalachia. And so our main goal was getting the checks out the door, getting dollars out the door, but doing it in a way that is letting people have agency and meeting people where they are. And so the checks weren't anything crazy. It was $250 per household with an additional $50 per kid. And we knew that that wasn't life-changing, right? That was just the first round of checks. But what it let people do is it let them think about the next 24 hours, and it let them It gave them agency over the next 24 hours. And so all in all, for 2022, we ended up sending out $18.5 million, with 2.8 million of that going directly to 8,000 individuals and families. Yeah, so that's the most like, it was chaotic, but we had checks in the hands of people. I believe it was 10 days after the 2022 floods. And we are still getting thank you letters today from our work then. So it was very, very rewarding.
Thanks, Stacy, for sharing all of that. Clee, I'm going to come to you now. One of your initiatives, the Community Power Map, has transformed what the city of New Orleans does during disasters. How did that happen?
Yeah, thanks for asking about this one, because this one is such a great example of the power of mutual aid and what mutual aid is outside of cash, as mentioned by Stacy, because we also talk about how we pass around the same 50. And so, yeah, we're trying to expand the strategy beyond that. So in 2020 is when we had several hurricanes at once. It was a historic storm season. And if you remember from my previous response, a lot of mutual aid efforts had launched in 2019 with COVID. So we were ready when 2020 hit. And near the end of the season, we had Hurricane Zeta that wiped out power intermittently across the city and 3 parishes that are relatively easy to get to from New Orleans. And so we had an online mutual aid group that we had created to be safe through COVID. And in that group and another group that we work with locally, folks started thinking about, how can I share my power if I happen to have power on at my house? And so at that point, we were like, we can put a little structure around this and help folks see how to do it. So as an organization and a mutual aid group, I will say we were able to do this because we had a little funding from CDP. So we were able to go and buy a few extension cords, a few fold-up chairs, and go show people how to set up power to the front of their house if they happen to have it. We launched this map. They were able to add themselves to the map and mark their homes as a safe place for Black and Brown and Indigenous folks, for queer and trans folks to come porch sit. We wanted to make sure that that was also a layer that we were asking. We asked folks to include pictures for accessibility if they are able to include pictures. And people started also including COVID supplies at their table. And at that point, we had essentially all of these pop-up hubs in front of houses across the city. As we added them to the map, we asked businesses to join, and they did. We asked libraries to join, and they did. Then we went to the city and we were like, can we get fire stations? Because then we would be able to swap oxygen tanks and charge medical devices that need a different type of power. They agreed. It all went great. We got hundreds of folks on the map. The next year, ahead of time, we asked the city, can we do this again, but in advance? Instead of us going to you after the storm, can you agree ahead of time to set up fire stations and basically like all city community properties, so rec centers, anyone that they were affiliated with that they might have some power, libraries, etc. The second year they did it. The third year they had launched their whole own program and were automatically, as a city, opening places as cooling centers, as a place to charge medical devices. And now 4 years out, we have, there's a whole project called the Lighthouse Project that is setting up churches and other places of worship as community hubs. And it is a city partnership. And so we are now able to continue running our power map. But at this point, it has actually shifted the way the city views power outages and what they can and can't do. And the other kind of cool thing is we have actually shifted the culture here locally. So at this point, with hundreds of people and businesses and libraries all putting their power out when you lose power, if someone loses power and doesn't put it out, it's kind of like, what's that about? why would you have power and not share it with folks? So we've kind of actually shifted folks like natural ways of moving in a storm, or probably more accurately, like given folks permission to act on that like natural desire to actually help, but not know how to help. So that went from an idea in a mutual aid group, person to person, an organization that had general ops funding to be able to support it and put structure around it, and then also advocate with the city, and the city back to the people, sharing power back.
Yeah, thanks, Clee. I love that example. It is such a tangible example of creating this culture of communities supporting each other. So really, really appreciate you sharing that. Hajooj, I'm going to come back to you now. The work that the ERRs are doing is really transforming the traditional aid models and really decolonizing humanitarian aid. How do you see mutual aid fitting into the broader aid ecosystem? And happy for you to talk about, the LCC, or but I'll leave this a little bit open-ended so you can choose which path to take. I'm sure there's a lot you could say on this.
There's a lot I can say about a lot of things. It's really amazing to hear Lee and Stacy talk, because a lot of the stuff is actually, it's building on what I could have said, because the first time the ERs happened twice. The first time was COVID. So COVID was the first time we got together and we tried to help each other and whatnot, with the idea of you can't travel, so neighbors were helping each other. So when they were saying that, I was like, oh, okay, that aligns with what we did. And there's stuff that Stacy said that she said it and she didn't really want to say it, the resistance part. And I love the connection with Joy, because the truth is, mutual aid is resistance. Like if the systems work, then the systems should take care of us. When the systems fail, that's when we need mutual aid. I wish that mutual aid was built within the systems, but I understand why people who want to control us would not do that. With that said, when you use the word decolonization, which is a word that we only started using literally not a long time ago, it's just now, we realized that when you want to do aid, where we say, yes, we want to stand with the community, and the way you stand with the community, you allow them to decide what they want to do with the money. The other thing is you allow them to work as a community, because there's this idea of give them individual money as opposed to allow them to come together and figure it out. When there's not enough individual money that you need to actually put your money together to eat, because there's not enough money. Like let's start with Sudan. It's a huge catastrophe. It's the world #1 human catastrophe. There's over 25 million people who need aid. There's pockets of famine, like straight up famine. There's gender-based violence got to the point of we had to have our female volunteers had to carry around rape kits. It was at that level. We have over 100 members who got killed, ER members through Sudan. So it's like really dire situation. So when you get at that point and you try to make the decision in Rome for the WFP, or in New York or in Geneva, like it's not doable. Like you cannot say what you could do. And that's when you go back and you're like, we can't work unless we get access. Even the Red Cross ran away from Sudan. So at this point, what do you do? And that's when you're like, there's people there, they'll figure it out. So I feel like the word decolonization is really important, because the old way of giving aid, which is we're going to send them these huge sacks of food, and we don't ask them if that's the food they eat. We don't understand how they're going to make fire, where they're going to get wood from. We don't care about all of that. That's just colonized way of thinking of we know better what people need. And that's why when I hear like stuff like, oh, okay, cool, we just send them checks and they can figure it out. And the idea of trust, which the colonized human right, like the human aid right now that's happening around, would never use the word trust. What do you mean? Like you don't trust them? They're all gonna steal. Like that's the idea and the mentality. So when you be like, I'm gonna give it on trust basis, I think they would just freak out. Like, where's your market analysis? Where's your this analysis? So that's how it normally works. So when it comes to like, how do you switch that narrative around? What we said was, give us 5% of the funding that you're spending, and we'll carry 20% of the load. What ended up happening was we were carrying the load and they were carrying like very less than us with way more money, because it's very expensive to do this old method of humanitarian aid that is based on, we know better, we're the experts, we studied this, we have all this research, than what we're doing, where we're just like, just whatever money we have it, let's figure it out and let's put our resources together and we're just gonna make it happen. What I think both Clee and Stacey were talking about, we normally call mutual aid only works with what we call solidarity economy, and that was like the farmers, the engineers, the medical practitioners, the community themselves, the people who come to clean, play with the children. So when we had the communal center, we came to cook, the children came and somebody was giving us some classes. People got books from their homes and set up a library. Somebody was teaching them how to grow a local garden. So they'll have a salad. People were just figuring things out. They were playing with them. There were sports. And you're talking about a place where bombs were falling and people were still managing to smile and have a routine for the kids and do all this other psychosocial support. Our women set up this spaces that were break rooms. They would just hang out in and have coffee and tea. And when there's a gender-based violence, they'll figure it out there, what to do with it, because we were given these workshops of how to do a case. And we were given like this, you're gonna take it and do this and then send it somewhere. It's like, there's nowhere to send it. There's this case thing doesn't work. So the community figured it out and nobody asks questions. Like, you just deal with it and they managed to deal with it. So this is, when you say decolonized, I feel like it's something that, to understand mutual aid, you understand it with your heart before you can understand it with your brain. And once you understand theoretical, then you start doing the small thing of, and I loved when Stacey was talking about the application, because we have a system called the F system, which is bureaucracy. So in the end, you go to a bureaucracy, which you need. And at this point, the beautiful thing that will happen when we went to this bureaucracy is we have all these techies that we have a lot of Gen Zs and some people using AI and whatnot, and started putting data together. When we started having over 600 ERs running thousands of projects, they started putting all these things together and came up with graphs and stuff and ideas, and they're still working on that and coming up with stuff that when we went to our funders, we had more data than they even ever have thought about and stuff. So I want to ask you, Tyler, because you're one of the people who supported us early on, why were you excited about the ERs? I mean, in the beginning, we were taught, like I learned it from other places. The word mutual aid is something that we learned from somewhere else. And then we found it within our communities. So we brought a lot of vocabulary that we have something called the fear and stuff. But we weren't sure of ourselves. Like, why would somebody come and support us? We're like grassrooted, we're not registered, we never did this before. So now I get it, but what did you see in us to be like, okay, let's support these people?
Yeah, thanks so huge. Well, first of all, I think, CDP was excited to fund mutual aid and the work of the ERRs before you all even had the very impressive data system and criteria calculators that you have now. That is very exciting, and I want to share it with the world. But here at CDP, we really believe that communities themselves know best what the needs are in times of crisis. So they are the ones present before, during, and after a crisis or disaster. So mutual aid work, the work of the ERRs, is such a rich example of communities quickly mobilizing and adapting based on the needs of the community. And in Sudan, in such a complex crisis, a complex environment, the fact that you all are able to mobilize and do as much as you can is truly so impressive, and really happy that we can highlight this work in the webinar today. So thanks for being here. Stacey, I'm going to come back to you now. So you're fiscally sponsored by the Foundation of Appalachian Kentucky. Can you tell us how that works? And is this a good partnership for other funders to adopt?
Yes, absolutely. So being fiscally sponsored just means that we are able to use the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky's 501c3 tax exempt status. And so basically the way that I like to put it is they do Appalachians for Appalachians, they do all of our back end accounting. So if we ever have expenses or anything like that, then we submit it to the foundation's accounting department, and we are audited by the foundation's auditors. And so they provide that back end support that a lot of smaller nonprofits just don't have, or they won't have for the initial first few years. but in return, we get to apply for grants using the foundation street cred because they are a nationally accredited community foundation. And so they will take an administration fee from any grants or any income that we have. Yeah, so that's just all that being fiscally sponsored means. And I do think it's a very valuable program to adopt because if you think about it, kind of touching on what Jesus was saying of people being the experts in their own communities. That's what I really love about the community foundation model is that, community foundations at their core do not come into communities and tell communities what they need. They give people the chance to have their own smaller nonprofits like Appalachians for Appalachia, who, we are the experts in our lived experience and we are able to inform practices that the foundation has, and the foundation is able to provide us with that back end support that they wouldn't have the thought partnership of Appalachians for Appalachia, which is an organization that serves all of Central Appalachia otherwise. And so, yeah, I cannot advocate enough for having fiscal sponsorships. It just allows you to get your hands into so many different sectors and so many different forms of advocacy within your communities, because the reality is that a team of 10 people is not going to be able to tell you what an entire state needs or what an entire region needs. And so I feel like fiscal sponsorship model is a real way to be able to do that.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. There are questions that came in before and during the presentation about how can donors support these informal groups, and a fiscal sponsorship is a great way to do that. So thanks for highlighting that. Hajuj, what can donors do to support mutual aid initiatives?
Okay, so going on first about the physical sponsor and whatnot. So with the ERs, when we started figuring out what we're doing and working on the ground and whatnot, a lot of different local and international NGOs got excited about us. So they wanted to support us. And in the beginning, it was random. If somebody calls them up, they would support it. So they would support whatever random ER. And normally the ones that happen to have some super educated people or people who had networks and whatnot got supported, and the others who didn't have it didn't get supported. And naturally, that means the ones that really need help didn't get support, and the ones, so that's how it works. So we quickly figured out that, hey, why don't these local NGOs, international NGOs, why don't we just try to talk to them? So we all come together and talk because they're not talking to each other. They want to support us. So we created something called the Localization Coordination Council, which is basically a place where the different ERs, whenever they need, they can come together. So right now we have 14 of the 18 states of Sudan that are represented there. And we have local NGOs that are excited about working with Grassroots. So we have 10 of them. And we have some international NGOs as observers who come there. So how can you support us? So we got a support, one of the ones that I love the most, we got a check from a woman in the US whose kid was sick, and she sent us a check for $12.5. And she was saying, my kid is sick and hopefully this helps a sick kid somewhere in Sudan. And that was amazing, like just to have people being able to donate. So we have a website where people individually can donate and money goes to us. You can donate through a lot of different organizations. You can donate through coalitions like the Mutual Aid Coalition that CPD is part of. You can donate through, so the thing we realized from the beginning is whatever method works for you, we're cool with it. We'll figure it out. So that's why we have different partners. And we have all these different partners from international local NGOs, the UN, we have partnership with OCHA. So basically we talked, for example, to the Germans, and they were like, we want to support you guys, but we can only go through the UN system. So we're like, okay, cool. The UN system takes away 40% of the funding goes away by the admin, whatever overhead, but we're cool with it. And then we have methods where it's direct funding, where 95% of the money goes to the people, like what we do with CPD, with other groups. So that's the best method. And then there's a lot in the middle where you can send it to an international NGO, which then you have to pay for their overhead, and then a percentage comes through. So there's all these different methods. We're cool with all these different methods. And one, if you're a donor, you can donate money, but you can also donate ideas. You can try to donate your time. There's so much ways we can do. I want to say one last thing. So what we do is in the beginning, there's life saving. So that's our number one. We're trying to save lives. Our number two is rehabilitation. Whenever the war is in a place and it moves to another place, then we try to figure out water. What do you do with education? So instead of like having those 2 hours, let's try to have more work. And the last one is what we call developmental, which is not the developmental in the old sense. It's just like we have over 26,000 coordinating members. 90% of them are Gen Z. So how do we empower them by giving them real knowledge, real ideas, let them explain and understand, mutual aid, but also the different sectors that they're working in, and give them the knowledge, the tools, so they feel one, they have a lot of knowledge, but two, that they didn't just waste 900 days of their lives where they couldn't go to university, they couldn't do this, they couldn't do work, whatever. So we're helping them because we realize that after this is done, these are the best people to move forward. They're genuinely proven that these are amazing human beings who should be in services, who should be in governments, they should be in different places. So we're trying to push them, and we feel like Sudan would be better. So the day the war ends, the situation ends, these are the people that I really wish would be in the forefront and leading. So hopefully by empowering them, by teaching them, by doing peer-to-peer, but also across, like today I'm learning a lot listening to Klee and Stacy, and so it's really amazing to always hear about this and whatnot.
Thanks, Ajuj. Yeah, it's really an inspiring story. So after our next question, we'll move to some of the question and answer portion of the webinar. So please do remember to put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Klee, what are 3 things you would say to funders about funding mutual aid?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to give a really quick 3-part answer. We'll see how it goes. The first thing I would say is actually rooted in the knowledge that like disaster relief efforts and emergency management has always been an inequitable response in the United States. We know that a lot of those funds move based off of numbers and not off people or necessarily even need. So how many people live in a place, how many homes are destroyed, that's when we'll decide when to step in. It is often a numbers game. And if you don't meet those numbers, you don't get the support, right? And so something that I've been speaking with funders about is what would an equitable response look like on the funder side, knowing that folks in the South with fewer numbers are less likely to actually get federal support, or folks in rural areas are also less likely to get federal support. So how can the philanthropic response actually be somewhat of an antidote to the gaps in the government response? The second thing I would say is to please fund place-based efforts. We work out of a farm called the Imagination Farm. It is incredibly important that we have this long-term space to build trust in. We do own the land and plan to be there for many generations. And we have noticed that over time, folks come back to us, right? And so when we're talking about disasters and increasing climate crisis, where it is possible to actually get a foothold for folks in a long-term way so that they can develop that community over time, we should be investing in that to build the trust and safety and the relational networks. That's going to build true long-term resilience. And then the third one I'll try to say really quick, because this is also for folks who are not philanthropists, but are actually trying to fundraise for your own mutual aid efforts. When you are fundraising as an intermediary or just an individual in a community, I try to give people the tip to split it into 3 buckets on the front end. Split it into relief, recovery, and preparedness on the front end. So when you get that influx of a lot of dollars right after a disaster and folks forget about you years later, you actually do have some funds left over to carry on the work. But that's something that an intermediary organization could also do as you're approaching bigger donors. And sort of set that as the actual standard, knowing again that we are safer when stuff is funded immediately and then constantly and preparing for the next storm. But that can be structured in our asks as individuals and intermediaries.
Thanks, Clee. So I at this point, I'm going to move us to the Q&A portion. We received so many questions before and during this webinar. Hopefully we've worked through some of them with the responses. And I just have a few that I'll pick out from the selection before, and also a few of these, hopefully we can get through quickly. I'll ask the speakers to please keep your responses to a quick headline or a few sentences so we can get through a few of them. As a reminder, CDP webinars aim to provide education for the philanthropic community. So while we welcome all the questions, we'll first focus on a few that focus on maybe donor issues. Hajuj, I'm going to come to you first. If you don't mind answering this as quick as you can, what criteria is used for the distribution of funds? If you want to just share a few things about the calculator that you all have come up with.
Wow, that's a hard question. So yeah, one of the hardest thing when we say we do equality, in the beginning it sounds really easy. Equality, yeah, we're going to send it. But then the demands are really high. Do you give money to famine, or do you give money to gender-based violence, or do you give money for evacuation? Like it's impossible to do all this. So we came up with something. We used to have meetings, and the meetings would last 6 hours to distribute $5,000. Like, how do you do that in the States of Sudan? So we came up, one of our guys a few of the guys sat together, and then one of them wrote a paper with the idea about the criteria. So he came up with these old criteria idea, and it had like different ways and stuff. And then our techie team put it together in a Google sheet, and it had a formula, and it had the weight system was very clearly stated, so everybody can look at it. And we sat in a meeting and we started playing with the weights. So it goes with everything from your previous work, your ability to do work, how many volunteers are there, what did you do in the past, your ability to write reports, your ability to do the work and whatnot. There's the idea of the crisis itself. Are you in the front lines or not? Are you dealing with people with disabilities and all other children under 5? Are you working with what kind of communities? Is there something extra compounded like a disease or not? So all of that has weights, and the idea is like each state comes and goes through it, and then we do the weight system, and then the rest do it, and then everybody sits together. And then there's the human part. Like sometimes the people will be like, okay, there's an attack that now happened in the Apache city, so they need more, so we gotta pull out. So there's that that also can happen. And then, yeah, did you have another funding, whatever? So we sit together, and then the calculator helps us have a number. And we know it's not accurate, but then this is a way that then we can copy it and send it to all our base ERs. So the 1,000, that this is how we came up with this decision. So this is one idea of like dealing with it, and it really helped us. So the 6-hour meeting now is 45 minutes, and we do separate workshops every 3 months that we go through the criteria, and people can try to change it, add new criteria, or talk about it and talk about the different, what went in the past, what did they think about it, and stuff like that.
Thanks, Hajuj, for explaining that. I know it was an impossible ask for me to ask you to do that quickly. Clee, I have a question here for you. Someone from the audience is asking, has CDP ever funded true mutual aid networks, grassroots, unincorporated, decentralized, or is this really just funding traditional C3 organizations who adopt a mutual aid program?
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in your response to that, Taylor, but I did want to say that what I'm hearing from Hajuj and Stacy, and also me, is that none of us are C3s or were C3s. And so I wanted to be like, CDP did fund us. CDP was our first big grant. Other than that, we had received one grant from the Trans Justice Funding Project, a very small one for a specific project. And so I just wanted to be like, hey, they funded us, and we are, and we're definitely grassroots and are not a C3 ourselves. But I am wondering your thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, thanks for kicking that back. I mean, there are pathways to fund mutual aid and to fund super local organizations. So one of the reasons CDP funds, the ERRs or Imagine Waterworks is to, shift that funding and power to the communities affected, but it's also to demonstrate to other funders that it can be done. So our hope is by demonstrating these different funding pathways through fiscal sponsorship, through other creative partnerships, we're able to bring other donors along and show them that they too can shift funding and power to local groups. So for example, with our international funding here at CDP, last year, about 78% of our international grants went direct to national and local organizations. Of course, that's not all mutual aid, but the work that Hajuj has been talking about is just one example of the types of programs that we're able to fund. Yeah, so thank you for getting that back. Stacey, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, well, I have just been off mute the entire time, but I was gonna address Andy's question in the chat, if that's okay.
Yeah, real quick. That'll be our last question, and then I'll wrap us up. But go ahead.
Okay, yeah, sounds great. So basically Andy asked about how we can understand that what the foundation did with the 18.5 million is mutual aid and not a very pure and classic form of charity. And so I think there's a really clear distinction here that is important to make. So realistically, I would say that about 3 million of that going directly to families and individuals is the mutual aid part of that work. But this is mutual aid and not classic charity, because we saw in our 2022 flood relief that the people we gave to are often the people that showed up in return for us. And so mutual aid really emphasizes collective action and like community empowerment. And it recognizes everyone's ability and right to resources and ability to contribute. And so that, as opposed to charity, which is a more top-down approach that provides aid to the less fortunate, but doesn't really have any expectations of a return on that investment. And that often creates a power imbalance as well. But mutual aid really seeks to address like systemic issues and build solidarity within communities, whereas charity provides this immediate relief, often without tackling root causes or expecting anyone to show up in return. So in 2022, we really saw our neighbors continuing to show up for each other. And it was always, your neighbor coming to help muck out your house that just lost everything, and not, somebody from Washington helping you come do that. So mutual aid is really about people's right to also contribute.
Thanks, Stacey. And thank you to all of our panelists today for a great discussion. I just want to share some quick advice to close us out from some of our colleagues, Garrett at the Appalachian Community Fund and Kristen at the Community Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky. The first takeaway here is it's up to funders to figure out how to get the money where it needs to go. So Garrett shared there may be extra hoops or extra steps, but it's possible to fund grassroots mutual aid. The next one here is the onus is on the entity with the power to bridge the gap. And then lastly, those closest to the issue know best what they need. And we heard that from all of our panelists today. This webinar is just one of CDP's many education and knowledge offerings. We provide weekly disaster updates, comprehensive disaster profiles, issue insights covering U.S. and international disaster topics. We also have special research reports relevant to disaster philanthropy. Our expert advisory services team can partner with donors who seek customized assistance with disaster giving strategies. And of course, our coalition building work provides support, coordination, and leadership to mobilize philanthropy on equitable disaster recovery. Beyond our expert resources, please visit our website to learn about our collaborative funds, including our Atlantic Hurricane Recovery Fund and our Sudan Humanitarian Crisis Fund. You can join us next month for our final regularly scheduled webinar of the year. The topic is Violence Against Women and Girls in Disasters and Crises, Funding Hope, Not Harm. It will take place on November 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. I am afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you to our co-sponsors and to Stacey, Klee, and Hajuj for sharing their insights with us. Please do take a moment to complete our post-webinar survey that is short to let us know what you liked and what you would like to see in future webinars. It will pop up automatically when you exit the webinar. If you have any questions or thoughts that were not addressed during today's webinar, you may email them to Tanya at webinars@disasterphilanthropy.org. Thank you and have a great day.